I'm a fan of Path of Exile 2, there's no doubting that. I'm a fan of the devs and their views on game design. They've even given away these pillars of success. The literal building blocks they used when designing Path of Exile are now Path of Exile 2. So why aren't other gaming studios taking notice? With Path of Exile 2's peak player count doubling that we saw in Path of Exile 1, I think it's about time other development studios took notice and learned a thing or two. These are the 3 things Grinding Gear games do that have brought them success. First up, they have a strong foundation for their process of design. Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games presented at GDC in 2019. That's the Game Developers Conference. And in their presentation, straight up told people how to make a good ARPG. And while the full hour-long talk provides a ton of insight into their process, one of their key points is their 5 pillars of design. Visceral action combat, randomly generated levels, randomly generated items, a secure online player economy, and deep character customization. Grinding Gear Games have said that if you can adequately capture all 5 of these pillars, you're set up for success. I personally can't think of many, if any, game studios that would happily discuss their success and break it down so specifically for others to make use of. Their competition to review and take notes on. This isn't just playing another company's game and taking notes, this is that company telling you the steps they took to succeed. What I love most about this is that this initial clip is from 2019, 6 years after Path of Exile 1 released. In those 6 years, they were able to take PoE from having an average Steam player count of around 30,000 players in 2013, up to regular peaks of over 100,000 in 2019, which has only continued to rise to close to 200,000 in 2024, and that's just Path of Exile 1 alone. And the developers themselves are somewhat surprised that their advice was largely ignored. In this interview with IGN in 2024, Jonathan recounted all 5 pillars off the cuff and then had this to say.
Last one, what is my 5th pillar? What have I forgotten here? Oh yeah, that's right, character customization. You have to have the ability to have a large amount of character customization so that if you're playing the game over and over again, you're going to have a lot of different ways to play. It's going to be a different experience every time. So to me, those are the 5, that's how you make an action RPG right there. We've said this at GDC talks before, and it's still action RPGs come out, and they don't have one of those. And I'm kind of like, we're giving you the secret sauce, guys. Like, that's how you do it. So yeah, to me, that's an action RPG right there.
Personally, I think a lot of the reasons studios haven't taken this advice on board boils down to 2 points. One is that PoE 1 was a niche game. It was growing, but honestly, it wasn't one of the big dogs across the wider gaming industry. And secondly, capturing all 5 of these game design pillars is a lot of work. In the decades since Path of Exile 1's release, we've seen the games industry move away from selling good games to make good money into selling games that are the minimum viable product and then packing in as much monetization as they can before players begin to quit initial testing. They're no longer making games for players to enjoy, they're making systems to keep the player in a loop while focusing efforts on monetization. Grinding Gear Games, though, never lost that focus on player-first design. They of course consider how they monetize their games, but they don't allow this to get in the way of those design pillars. Their free-to-play model with cosmetic microtransactions does nothing to take away from the combat, from the levels, from the items, the economy, or character customization. Well, you could argue it lets you customize further through cosmetics if you choose to. Nothing there impacts on the actual gameplay experience, and this is how they continue to set themselves apart from an industry that is actively moving in the opposite direction. But we'll touch more on that soon. My second point is that Grinding Gear Games have always valued their community, and that's because they came from it. All of the head devs have openly discussed their gaming inspirations, Diablo 2 being chief among them. They are gamers. They came from gaming communities, and understand the value of community engagement. In their most recent Q&A the other week with Gazzy and Darth Microtransaction, they were asked about implementing checkpoints in endgame maps to reduce backtracking.
Random side note, but sure.
We've almost got all of them. Checkpoints and maps in order to backtrack in maps. How do you feel about that?
So not for resurrecting purposes,
just for fast travel.
Purposes.
It's not a terrible idea. I'd have to think a little bit about how we would position those.
If you're not familiar, endgame maps can require you to cross them and then come all the way back if you missed a rare enemy. In the interview, they discussed it, and later that week in the patch, it was implemented. A small change, a simple change, but one that is a quality of life improvement direct from the community, implemented shortly after the discussion, and this happens often. One of the reasons I enjoy listening to interviews with Chris, Mark, and Jonathan is that when they're asked a question, it's not a yes or no. It's a discussion on why systems are implemented the way they are. It's a discussion on player behavior. It's an open forum for suggestions to be made, and they will ask for the opinions of those interviewing them. And often, you'll see them have a live discussion about the particular issue and potential solutions. I'd highly recommend watching some interviews, particularly some of the Q&As, and watch how they respond to community questions. Most studios would be terrified of this kind of open discussion happening in front of the public, in case a dev inadvertently commits to something they shouldn't, or gets asked a question they can't answer. Grinding Games do it openly, because they have very little to hide. Of course, at times they can't comment, but they always listen to community feedback. They might not act on it, if they feel it is not in the community's best interests, but it's the fact that they engage in this forum that is incredible. I've discussed this somewhat in a previous video I made talking about Larian Studios, the company behind Baldur's Gate 3. They have a very similar approach. They don't do as many open forum discussions, but they actively use early access as a way to engage their community when developing their games. They did this for Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, and then Baldur's Gate 3. And if you've played all 3 games, you'll see the clear improvements that are informed by the community. Grinding Games respect their player base and their opinions. They retain creative control, but they aren't afraid to use their community as a resource for discussion on these points. Something I wish more developers would be willing to do. It's a lot of work, but I would say that the success of Path of Exile 2 now, and the success I'm sure it will have in the future, are a testament to this form of engagement. Could you imagine Ubisoft, Blizzard, or any other development studio having as much of an honest or open discussion with their community as Grinding Games do? They have built up so much goodwill with their community, and they're being rewarded for that through the release of an insanely ambitious title in Path of Exile 2. Think about it. Talk to the people playing your game. Listen to their good ideas. Implement them. In what world does that not lead to improvements? And for my final point, I'm going to jump into that discussion on monetization and respect for your time and money. Grinding Games respect your time, and they respect your wallet. They respect your time by ensuring you have a lot, and I mean a lot of content. I've got 200 hours in Path of Exile 2 at the moment, and I've barely touched more than 2 to 3 builds in any meaningful way. I have hundreds of skills still to explore, all for $30. Now, if you haven't enjoyed Path of Exile 2, I understand. You're not wrong in your opinion. It's okay to not enjoy it. Not every game is for every player, and that's okay. But I think it's reasonable to say that the value on offer is insane when you compare it to other releases, which I won't name for the sake of the comments. And this is all going to be free in what I expect to be 12 months. And it's going to double in size. You think you're getting good value now? By the end of 2025, it's going to double. And while they're respecting your time and money in this, I don't feel like Grinding Games really got enough praise for bringing over the microtransactions from Path of Exile 1 to Path of Exile 2. Just take a moment and think about what other studios would do that. Can you imagine any studio deciding that they want to put in the extra work to update and bring your cosmetics from a 10-year-old game into a brand new title? I can't think of any other studio that would dedicate resources to that. No one would have blamed them for leaving the Path of Exile 1 cosmetics in Path of Exile 1. I wouldn't have. I would have happily bought my stash tabs again if I needed to. Grinding Games show repeatedly through their actions that the player really is their focus. They play their own game. They enjoy their own game. They don't want to impact on your or their enjoyment of the game simply to make an extra buck from you. They want to respect you because they know it'll pay off. And look at that now. Path of Exile 2 is smashing it, still maintaining an average player count of around 220,000 players a day as we approach 2 months post-release, and that's just on Steam alone. It's wild to me that a company that so openly discusses their development style, their community approach, and successful player-friendly monetization isn't a company that other studios look to for ideas. It's all on the table. We just need the industry to start recognizing gamers and less like livestock to be milked. I think the biggest problem here is that all of these other studios know this is possible, but they choose to chase insane profits at the detriment to the player. It's just kind of sad where the industry's gone. And I hope more studios over time look at Grinding Games, look at Larian Studios, and start to think that maybe they should backtrack a little bit and go back to making games that actually support players. Now, I'm not a game developer. I have no experience in game development. I'm just a gamer that's been doing it for a good 25 plus years. And when I look at this, when I see that Grinding Games have these discussions so openly, present at GDC to show these ideas, it just makes it hard to excuse the current state of the gaming industry. It's very hard to look at a lot of games releasing underpolished or with features that used to be baked in but now being paywalled. It's so hard to justify those actions when developers like Grinding Games and Larian Studios exist. Developers who are more than happy charging a single box price or selling you nothing but cosmetics and giving you hundreds of hours of content, highly polished content, in the case of Baldur's Gate 3, part of Exile 2, still waiting on that polish, but we all know that it's early access. How do we justify the state of the industry when this type of development is possible and openly discussed? Thanks for checking out this video. I'm sure I'll get the odd Grinding Games shill comment below, but let's be honest, their actions speak louder than I can. If you've enjoyed the video and want to help me out, you already know how. Throw a like on it, sub if you want to see more, but you being here is really all that matters. I'll catch you down in the comments, and if you want to chat more, come hang out in my streams every Tuesday and Thursday, 4 PM Australian Western Standard Time. Appreciate you guys a hell of a lot. And shout out to Grinding Games for creating what may be the ultimate ARPG. They've still got a way to go, but they're absolutely on an insane path. Until then, have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.